You are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, I had the opportunity to interview Jennifer Manocherian. Jennifer, who is a former Broadway and off-Broadway play producer, is the author of the book Alpha Bette. Apollo is my middle name. Papyrus is a Latin word for a type of reed that was used to make paper in ancient times.
I know all about it.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to start the interview when you are.
Okay, it's good.
I'm here with Jennifer Manocherian. Oh, boy. Okay, try that again.
Manocherian.
I'm here with Jennifer Manocherian. Manocherian, who is the author of the book Alpha Bette. Jennifer, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay. Well, I am I kind of jokingly say I'm somebody who's had as many careers as a cat has lives. I've done many things in my life. I am in my senior years, but I am acting like I'm 40 right now because it's been a crazy year for me. I've written a book this year that's on all sorts of Amazon and all the different online sites. The name of it is Alpha Bette, pronounced Bet. And that's one thing I like to talk about. But I've had many careers, and I also have a large family, and all the things in my life have kind of led up to this moment. In fact, somebody asked me why it took me so long to do this, and I think I had to have lived a long time to have been able to write a novel like this, because it incorporates a lot of things that I've done in my life. I've been a theater producer. I've been a theater musical book writer. I've been a screenwriter. I've produced a film. I have another one I did this year that's right now hoping to go on the festival circuit in 2004. I've been a family therapist. I did divorce mediation. I did PR many, many years ago. So I've done many, many things in my life. But right now I've kind of settled into novel writing, and it's something that I'm really enjoying. And I have another book in the pipeline. So that's pretty much, and I have a large family, and I have a cat sitting on my lap right now. So I've had a long and very full life.
Without spoiling too much of Alpha Bette, what inspired you to write it, and what is that book about? Okay,
I will try not to talk too long and interrupt me, please, if I get too long-winded. I never thought I would write a novel. I mean, I just didn't think I'm much more comfortable doing dialogue. I create characters, and that's part of what I do when I teach. But I can create characters with depth, which is important to me, and screenwriting is normal. But a narrative form of writing, I just never thought it would happen. So it's not like I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to write a novel. What happened is, about 10 years ago, a friend of mine who's a writer encouraged me to take a short story writing class. And I took that class just to test myself to see if I had any ability to write in narrative form. And it turned out I did. I mean, I took it. I love it. I'm still part of the group. It's been a fantastic way of testing what I'm writing and getting feedback, which I do as well from all my writer friends. But it's been a long road. It's been part of what happened is COVID, where as a theater producer, my office closed because theater more or less shut down. And I had time. I was at home, and I have energy thanks to my DNA. And I just decided to really take a stab at doing this novel, because over the course of years, my writer friends and I, every summer we do like a week-long writing retreat. And I've been creating different stories. And at some point, I'm sorry, I'm just got over COVID and I'm just choking just for a sec. I need water. I decided to see if there was a way of integrating all these stories into a whole story that made sense. So anyway, that's kind of the origin of it. As I worked on it, I had to weave together, find a way to connect all these characters and have, a through line that made sense. So basically the story, it takes place it's a very New York City urban story. It all takes place on the Upper West Side in a pre-war building. The apartment is almost another character. In a building on the Upper West Side, in an apartment that belongs to an old lady. She's a widow. She's 95, and she wakes up one morning and something happens which she takes as a sign from her dead husband that there is such a thing as an afterlife. She'd been waiting for it. They had made a decision when they were very young that if one of them died first, they would try to signal the other. So it's been 5 years she's been waiting, and she finally gets that sign. And based on that, she makes a decision to have a dinner party that night for a relatively small group of people who are in her life at that point, which means her daughter, her great-granddaughter, her two neighbors in her building, and her housekeeper and her night aide. And those are going to be the guests. And each one of the guests they all link together in different ways. And each one of the guests has its own point of view. So there's like 8. Oh, and I forgot to add, there's also a medium in the story who's one of the guests to the party. So it all unfolds during the day as you get to know through their separate points of view, each character, and how they're interrelated and what issues they're dealing with and struggling with, and how it all comes to a head at the dinner table. So that's the story in a nutshell.
If you need to pause at any time to take a drink of water, it's okay.
Thank you.
My mom has respiratory issues from having been a smoker since before she could legally smoke. Let's just put it that way. So I fully understand.
Well, I'm probably of that generation. I think when I was about 12, one of my friends' mothers took us out into the woods and said, well, you're probably going to do it anyway, so have a cigarette. That was the beginning. But I'm not a smoker anymore.
What was the name of the hybrid publisher that published your book, and why did you choose to use a hybrid publisher instead of going the traditional route or using a self-publishing distributor?
Well, first of all, I felt a self-publishing distributor I didn't really consider, because I just think I wanted to get a very polished book. I did think about initially trying to get an agent because, as I said, I have a writing group and they're all published. And I've learned a lot about what's entailed in getting a book publisher. First of all, one of the people in my group, she didn't have a lot of control over her book cover, over her book title. And from the time they accepted her book, and it was a major publishing company, to the time it was published was like 3 years. And as I said, I'm not exactly a spring chicken. And 3 years is a long time in my life. And I didn't really want to wait. And I also wanted more control because I'm not a known writer. And I wanted, having been in theater for over 30 years, I'm well aware of how important the image that you have is, the poster and the title. I'm very big on really strong titles. And I didn't want to hand that responsibility over to somebody else. I wanted control over that process. And I also wanted to work with a company that was selective. I didn't want it to be just any company, because there's a certain, even though it doesn't have the legitimacy of being published in the traditional way, there is a certain ranking among hybrid publishers in terms of how selective they are. So I had sent my book out to several of the ones that I felt like were top of the line, and they only accept maybe 15%, and they often require that you do edits after they've even taken it. And I was accepted by a couple of, I didn't get turned down by anybody. So I got it. The first one that accepted me, I started working with because I liked them right away. And then afterwards, I got accepted by She Writes and a couple of other places, but I was already well along in the process. And I started in February, and by September, my book was done, it was out. So that's like a 6-month process where, they also, I have to say, they didn't require any developmental changes. And one of the reasons for that is that before my writers group, and I have people who are readers like my sisters and other people whose judgment I trust. I had them read it and give me notes, and I'm very open to notes. If I don't do everything people ask, but if people say something and I feel like it'll make the book better, I will try to do that. And so I had a lot of notes from people who had already were my writer friends who'd read it, and it was in pretty good shape. But then I made a decision to send it to a really good developmental editor, and she really whipped it in shape. She gave me a lot of notes, and it was a big challenge, but it was a really smart note she gave me, and I only disagreed with one thing. So I feel like by the time I got it to the right publisher, I had done almost all the work except for getting it out.
Why did it take you so long in your life to write your book? And once you started writing your book, how long did it take you to write it?
Well, I was very busy doing other things. I mean, I was, and the years when I was a therapist and doing divorce mediation, writing really wasn't. I mean, I always write. You write case studies. I've written in different forms, but never, in the form of a novel. But I wasn't thinking about writing. But I've always written screenplays, and I like to write. I mean, I see stories everywhere. If I'm sitting down at dinner and I hear a conversation or I see people that pique my interest, I start in my head writing a story. So I would, when I was doing theater, I was pretty engaged in that, but theater changed for the period of time I was involved, and it became, I don't know, the business. Theater as a business is a really, really tough business, and I just started getting more interested in being creative rather than just being, somebody who raises money and gets a show, tries to get a show up. And so I've started writing. I wrote the book of a musical. I've written a book of actually a couple of musicals that can be seen online. And I have a composer team I work with. I have a director I work with. But I'm always looking for new things. I mean, I'm somebody it's just part of my personality for new challenges. So when I started this short story writing group, which was just on a lark, and that was maybe 10 years ago, at that time, I never thought that this was going to be the outcome. So I started to enjoy writing in that form, narrative form. But I had a lot to learn because when you do playwriting or screenwriting, the camera does a lot for you. That when you're writing a book, you've got to help the reader see where you are and fill in a lot of stuff that can be done by a camera otherwise. So it was a hard process for me, but it was really more than one reason it took so long is that it was always put on the back burner because I would have other things that were more urgent, maybe a play I was working on or something else I was doing that would not. So I need time. I need time where I can just kind of commit myself during that time to doing it. So I mostly worked on it during my summer retreats, and it was a slow process. But as I said earlier, when COVID came around and I had we all had to learn slowly that this was here to stay and we were going to be living our lives in our homes for quite an extended period of time. So when that became a reality, I really used it. My office in the city, I had to close it. And we lived inside. My husband's very afraid of he still hasn't had COVID. I just got it for the first time recently. But, when your social life ends, we couldn't see our family and our kids, our grandchildren the way you used to. So I put that time really pretty solidly into writing this novel. So that's kind of that then became my priority. And right now I'm finishing a movie we're in post-production and almost done with a film that I made that I had written. The director also has a writing credit on it because she did her own pass on it. And we were entered into, I don't know if we'll get into Sundance. We'll know in the next couple of weeks. But that's something that's also been very consuming for me. But that we didn't film until this May. We filmed it in Minnesota in May. So, but right now, once that's put to bed and the book, and now all I want to do is, my main focus right now is wanting to write a second novel. it's kind of now into my bloodstream. It's where I want to land right now.
Okay, you mentioned that you're working on a second novel. Without spoiling too much of it, do you have a name for it or a working title, and what will it be about?
Well, I don't have a working title, and believe me, that'll be something I will really focus on. But it's on one of the characters that are in the other novel, and that character, and you don't have, I have to write it in a way that you won't have to have read the other one in order to know these people. But there's going to be a few people who are in the other novel who I'm going to pick up their story from where the other one ended. And the character in particular is someone named Miss Seidenstricker. And she's a very nasty neighbor. And she's a character. Writing about somebody who's nasty is a lot of fun to write. And of course, during the course of the book, you have to, the first book too, Alpha Bette, you have to kind of see what makes her tick and understand why she has that hard shell and kind of crack into it a little, which you do. But I want to pick up and have her story and go into much more depth about her life and why she is the way she is. And so that's basic. And a couple of the characters who are in the first book are going to also be part of this story, but not the main story. And I want to just add something else, and that is that I'm also involved, and this isn't about writing, but it's something I care about deeply. And it's the state of the world. It's the state of our democracy. I'm very involved in an effort to get young people to register to vote, because the whole idea of citizenship, people are so turned off that people just kind of don't bother to vote anymore. And I think it's really important. And another nonprofit I'm involved with is called the Peace Studio. And the aim of the Peace Studio is to support artists of all different media who go into their communities and in whatever form spread healing messages. Because we need I think it was Bush who used to talk about the kinder, gentler world. We need a kinder, gentler world. And so those are things that also occupy my mind and my time.
Now, the organization encouraging young people to be civically involved in America, you're on the board of, is that 18 by Vote? Is that the name of it? Okay.
Yeah, 18byvote.org. And what we've learned over the process of a few years since we started it, is that it's very grassroots. You don't get Taylor Swift to write a movie about go and register, and people register. They'll go and listen to her sing it or listen to her play it. But if you want to get people really involved, you have to let them know why what's at stake for them. So it's a very foot on the ground type of effort to get people to go into communities and help them understand, listen, and this is your area, and maybe the water is polluted or whatever. This is what's at stake for you, and why it's important for you to vote. So that's kind of what that effort is. And in fact, the other organization, Peace Studio, has learned the same lesson, in a sense, that the people who are most effective are not the TikTok broad messages, but it's going into the communities and helping people see and learn on a very one-to-one basis.
I'm going to pivot back to your book, Alpha Bette. Now, you wrote that using multiple points of view, which I found to be very interesting. And why did you decide to do that?
Well, I can give kind of a glib answer that in a way it was easier, because I didn't really know how it was going to be about it was going to be about, well, the medium has only 2 chapters. She's kind of like, she's important, but she's not a main character. But all the people who are going to be sitting at that dinner party, who have lives that they have past lives. I mean, like, for example, the young night aide is from Croatia. She's a young woman, and she has in order to understand her and know her, I didn't know how it could be done, only told through the point of view of the older woman. I mean, I feel like you want to go into the heads of these people and know what's going on with them. So I felt like by having each one have his or her own point of view, you can do chapters where it's connected to other characters, and other characters filter in and out of it, but where you learn about them. You learn, somebody, this isn't somebody for example, her name is Vanera. She gets a text or she sends a text to her fiance in Croatia. So you know something about her life there. But everything that actually happens happens within the course of that day. But during the course of that day, you get to know all the backstories and issues of the people who are going to be at the dinner table. And I just, frankly, I didn't know how else to do it. I guess it would have, I didn't know, because there's when you start learning how to write, and this was in my writing group too, when I began, the whole issue of point of view was something I had to really learn. I read a lot, but I never thought as much about point of view. If you're writing from a certain point of view, you can't keep switching points of view in a chapter. You have to know. So that when you have a whole character who that particular chapter is from that character's point of view, you can play with that. You can know what's going on there internally for them. You can work with that. But I can't be writing a chapter about the old lady, and in the middle of that, insert something about what somebody else was thinking. I'm sure it can be done, but I don't have the skill to do that. So doing it from multiple points of view made it possible for me to really go into the heads of all the different people and know what they're thinking and know what their goals were and their problems were and their issues were. So that's kind of the only answer I can give you. And in fact, my other book that I'm working on now is going to be more challenging for me, because it's going to be pretty much, I haven't made a set decision yet, but it may all be from the point of view of that one character. And so I'm going to have to figure out how we get to know the other characters.
I have time for one final question. Are any characters in your book based on real life people?
I knew you were going to say that. The answer is yes and no. It's not autobiographical. It's not. Anybody who writes can only write from their own experiences, right? I mean, I write from what I know and what I know about people. And in fact, the first thing that started this book was a writing prompt I had maybe 10 years ago. And the prompt was about, you're looking in a mirror and what do you see? And I chose to not do it from my own point of view, but from the point of view of my own mother, who was also in a wheelchair for a number of years. And she had never seen herself in a mirror. She had no vanity, and she just never looked at herself. And she didn't stand up, so she didn't see herself. So one day we were passing a three-way, floor to ceiling mirror. And she said, "Wait, stop. I want to see what I look like." And that always struck me. It was such an interesting thing to me. And I took that incident with my mother and then I changed it. I made a lot of changes with it in The Old Lady, but it was kind of the genesis of The Old Lady. And then there were specific things that happened in the book. I don't want to say a lot because I hope some people will want to read it. But I mean, there was an incident of somebody going to a hospital, an emergency room, having hit his head against something and bleeding badly. And that I took, directly from something that happened with my father. Now, I mean, it was just my knowledge of what it was like and my feelings at that time. So to the extent that it was autobiographical, it was just based on, things that were in my mind that helped me make these characters and bring them to life, but nothing was literally autobiographical. I mean, like the nasty lady neighbor, Miss Seidenstricker. I mean, I chose her name for a teacher I never liked, but it had nothing to do with her. It was just I chose that name. So, you pick and choose from your life and you take things that have happened. And I think everybody has to write that way because you're writing from your own experience. I don't know if that's helpful.
Jennifer Manocherian. Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't know if that's helpful. What I just said, but or if you agree with it or not, but I feel like it's, in fact, I'm going to just add something really quickly. And it's, it's something, as I wrote this book, I never really identified myself with the old lady, in terms of feeling of wanting to make sure kind of your house was in order before you died. Everybody was well. That's kind of one of the things she needs to do. She has work to do in her life. And the more I think of it, that's something that's important to me too, to know that everybody's in good, is good. And I can die. I'm not planning to die for a long time. But I had never thought about how much that is part of me until after the book was written. And I just came to realize it was more about myself in that way than I had really realized while I was writing it.
Jennifer Manocherian, you are a wonderful guest for this podcast, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast. And did I get your name right in the closing?
Yes, you did. I also have an Aaron, right?
Yeah, Aaron, yes.
Aaron Apollo. I won't forget that Apollo because I love that. I have a website. It's just, my name is kind of tough, and people spell Jennifer 100 different ways nowadays, but it was the old way, JENNIFER, Manocherian, MAN. It's phonetic, MANOCHERIAN.net. And on my website, I have information about the book, about the movies that I've done, I also knit. We have some stuff that's on Etsy right now. So I have there's a lot about me, sorry, on my website. And my book is sold Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm trying to get it onto Walmart, which will be cheaper. And everywhere that you can find online books. There's an ebook, there's a paperback, and it should have already been done, but it's been very delayed, and there'll be an Audible version of it very shortly.
You're never too old or young to start writing. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding you all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.